Political commentator Trish Sherston is with us this morning, along with the Hui host Julian Wilcox. Morena.
Morena, te nawe.
Good to see you. Trish, we'll start with you. That would kind of make sense why it's taking so long, is because they've all got to agree with everything that they're all agreeing to.
Seymour's point is right. It's interesting, isn't it, that since MMP in 1996, there's never been three parties in a coalition deal. So you've had often one party signs a coalition deal, and then you've had confidence and supply agreements with up to two other parties. So at one point you had Labour with United Future and New Zealand First. So this is a very different thing. And I think the difficulty in it, and probably why it is taking so long, is when it comes to Cabinet. Because remember, Cabinet decisions run on consensus, not votes. So even though in that Cabinet you might have, say, 20 Cabinet ministers inside Cabinet, you might have, maybe, who knows how many it's going to be, but you might have 14 from National, and you might have 3 each from New Zealand First and ACT. New Zealand First and ACT still have equal voice around that table. So I imagine part of these discussions is how are we going to resolve impasses around the Cabinet table, let alone, so the what do you want has been the first thing, but then there's quite a few mechanics that they'll have to figure out underneath.
Absolutely, and they all have to, once a decision is taken, there's collective Cabinet responsibility, which means that they all have to kumbaya on these issues, and there's no out clause.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the other thing you will remember is when Helen Clark had the government and Winston Peters, I think, was Minister of Foreign Affairs, you had the unsightly mess of Winston essentially disagreeing with Cabinet and disagreeing with the Prime Minister on international relations matters, and that was hugely unsightly. So this is why Luxon wants to have an operational agreement, not just a heads of agreement on principle or on policy, but an operational agreement on what they're going to work together on, and then make sure that he can get that collective responsibility together. Yes, it's taken a long time, and that's probably why it's taken such a long time. And lots of people would have said, good luck, bro, when he started on this path, but it feels like he's getting there. However, when he said yesterday they'd closed out the agreement, it sounds like he'd jumped the gun. That's certainly what you get from Winston Peters and David Seymour yesterday, and their reaction to what he said after 3 o'clock.
Which maybe, I saw that as this guy just wants to tell the media something's happened, you know what I mean? Like he's desperate to just sort of move the story along because it's taking so long. Trish, so if they're now talking, or have they been talking about potentially National's legislative program that they want to introduce over the next 3 years, and testing the waters to see whether Winston's going to support them on it, whether ACT's going to support them on it? How much of that kind of talk would have been going on?
Well, there would have been a lot of that. And yesterday, it sounded like it was a political game of I'll show you mine if you'll show me yours. So National's done a deal with ACT and New Zealand First separately. Yesterday was about each of those smaller parties getting to see what the other's agreement is about, because obviously they've got to be okay with that as well. And the difficult balance is to each of those parties in the coalition agreement, it has to feel proportionate, and that it's something that, don't forget, the step from here is, and this is maybe why Seymour and Peters were a bit prickly. If you think about what Winston Peters said, he said, you're making an assumption, there are other people I have to I have to talk to. So after this deal has been done in the room, those leaders have to then take it off to their caucus and their party boards and get it signed off. So there are quite a few steps in that process.
Yeah. Julian, when it comes to ministerial roles, I want it to be on the record that I said a couple of weeks ago I thought that Winston would be gunning for AG, the Auditor General's role, because interestingly, if you look at the job description, it's the only ministerial role which is exempt from collective Cabinet responsibility on important constitutional issues like treaty issues potentially, or, so that would potentially be an out clause for him to talk rubbish about the government. Yeah,
and also given his history and issues related to the SFO and other things, it's right up his alley, right? And the other thing is he can essentially bleed some institutions dry. He's obviously got something against the Waitangi Tribunal, so therefore he can stall appointments on any new judges or anything else that happens with the Waitangi Tribunal if he is the Attorney General. And I think also, given his legal background, he'll argue, well, given my expertise and experience, this is right up my alley and I'm the right minister for that. That'll make life interesting, I think, for Cabinet going forward. It'll make life interesting also in some some other matters like treaty referendum. And let's be honest, I think there's a couple of things that people have given up on here, and they've talked about these things yesterday. I think ACT's fairly malleable when it comes to issues like the treaty referendum. I know he went hard on it, but they're going to find another way to have a crack at the treaty, particularly around policy and also the implementation of treaty policy in government departments going forward. I don't think the referendum's going to happen, and he's had to give way on that. I think Nationals probably had to give way on foreign buyers to give Winston the ability to say, well, I've got something as Attorney General, but he's had to give way, but National will have to give way on foreign buyers, and I think that's also going to happen. I think New Zealand First in particular, aside from the Attorney General, will want a policy program and ministerial positions in places like infrastructure or regional development or energy. Why? Because those are big issues in the north. That's where Shane's from, that's where Winston's from, that's where the current candidate for Port Waikato's from, that's where Jenny Marcroft's from. And I know Winston had a crack about broadcasting as well, and obviously this is a little bit of us, swimming in the soup that we're in. But you've got someone in Jenny Marcroft who's a former broadcaster, and if there is some interest in that, that could be something that she wants. Now, that's really hard on Melissa Lee, who has been, I think, a really good broadcasting spokesperson, actually, for National and Opposition, and did really well in Mount Albert. But that speaks to a strength of Jenny Marcroft, and that might be another portfolio they're gunning for.
You don't think Shane wants fisheries or, any of those other...
Maybe, but I think if you get something really big like infrastructure or energy, infrastructure, you're talking about things like ports. New Zealand First is a big thing about ports, particularly in Whangarei.
Don't forget this time around, there's going to be no regional economic growth fund. So there's no big money pot. And I think what we saw with the last government, it's not just about the policy wins that you get, but it's the calibre of ministers who ultimately make or break getting those policies. Delivering on those policies. So I think that's where there'll be a big focus from National on people who've done well as opposition spokespeople. There are a number of them, Erica Stanford, Dr. Shane Reti, Simeon Brown, etc., where you don't want to lose the knowledge they have had in opposition. Equally, I think if you were David Seymour, I know he says policies are more important than sort of the baubles of office. But again, if you want to have major state sector reforms, you would probably want something like Minister for State Services, or National will want that, because, that is a major area where you're going to have a good minister to drive change through.
Just finally, people keep saying that Seymour wants the Deputy Prime Minister job. I don't think he's interested in it. It sort of goes against everything that he has said about the real change. What's your view? Well,
look, I see Trisha's nodding her head as well, and I agree with you. I think it would be really hard for Seymour to get Deputy Prime Minister over someone like Winston Peters, who, let's face it, when Jacinda Ardern had that break and had her leave, he was an effective acting Prime Minister, and he's experienced in it. Is he willing to give it up to give it to someone like Nicola Willis? Maybe, and that's something I think that they've been negotiating and discussing all throughout these last few weeks. However, I think it would be a really hard gig to try and say to Winston, we're not giving you Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, but also I think this is a real toughie, because when there was only Labour and New Zealand First, you could have Winston as Deputy Prime Minister, and when the Prime Minister's away, he could speak on behalf of the government. How can you have Winston Peters as Deputy Prime Minister speaking on behalf of ACT and National in a coalition government? That's a much more complex. So this time round, I think choosing that Deputy Prime Minister is much tougher.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of landmines, I feel like, that it will have to be traversed. Potholes.
Manholes.
Whatever they are. 17 after 7, political commentators Trish Sherson and host of The Hui, Julian Wilcox, with us this morning.